Spencer, and you might have heard me recently on Radio Bolton telling the story of Samuel Cromton and playing music from the album The Samuel Cromton Song. And with me is the man who started the idea for this and introduced me to the world of Samuel Cromton. He's the well-known Bolton writer and poet, Harry Booth. And how are you today, Harry?
Well, I'm still in fine fettle, Roger.
Harry, where did you get the inspiration from for the song?
Well, it all started for me, Roger, 16 years ago. I worked for a famous company called Dobson and Barlows, who produced textile machinery at that particular time. But I do believe in 1790 the company was called Dobson and Rothwell, and they were friends of Crompton, and they produced the first spinning mules for Crompton. I was living up Harwood for quite some time. Pub I used to go into was called the House Without a Name, and the landlord, who was called Harry Core, had put an advert in our local paper advertising for local songwriters to come forward. So this gave me the inspiration to go and meet the landlord, because I've always been writing songs for many years, and at this particular time the Bolton Festival was coming up, which was in aid of Samuel Cromton, so this really inspired me into writing the song. But unfortunately I was too late to present it to the festival, but I still didn't give up on the idea, and some years later I met up with you.
Yes, I remember it well. You rang me up on the phone and said, would you like to write some songs? So I went down to your place and I knocked on the door, and this voice from the bowels of the house shouted, "Come in, the door's unlocked." So I went in, and when I finally found you, there was this figure lying there with what I can only describe as the biggest plaster cast I've ever seen on his leg. Anyway, you gave me the lyrics, and of course one of the lyrics was the Samuel Cromton song, and as soon as I saw it I thought, well, that's got great potential. So I got some music together, and we put the song together. We still had lots of problems getting people interested in the song, didn't we?
Yes, we did, Roger, because at that time we tried to interest a lot of singing groups, but with no success, and even radio and television. But still nobody wanted to take up the idea of the song at all.
No, that's right. I think in the end we decided, well, we just got to do it ourselves. So that's how the record label Lovely Company Records came into being. And we wrote some more songs together, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And we put them on the album called The Samuel Cromton Song, and that's history now, it's a corner phrase. But when we got the album together, you managed to get a meeting with Dr. Gray, didn't you, at the Bolton Museum?
Yes, we went down to see Dr. Gray, and we told him all about the cassette album of songs of Crompton, and he seemed to be very interested, and he said that we could market the songs in the shop and the museum and artifact shop.
That's right, yeah. He gave us an order, and that was it. And really from there, the song is now on sale. Where, Wigan Pier?
Well, with Wigan Pier, Roger, like you say, we've got Style in Cheshire, Elmshire at Rosendale.
That's right. So it's going from strength to strength.
Radio for the discerning listener. It's all for you on 106.2 Radio Bolton.
My name's Roger Spencer, and I'm here to tell the story of Bolton's most famous man, the legendary Samuel Cromton, inventor of the world-famous spinning mule. But how much do you really know about him? Samuel Cromton was born on the 3rd of December 1753 at Furwood Fold. But the story really starts when Sam was 5 years old, and the Crompton family, Father George, Mother Betty, Sam and his two sisters, took up residence at the now famous Hollis Wood. Now Hollis Wood was a large house owned by the Starkey family. It had been empty for many years, and George Crompton was taken on as a sort of tenant caretaker, partly on the reputation his wife Betty had for good housekeeping. But almost as soon as they had settled, tragedy struck. Father George fell ill and died at only 32 years old. The family must have been devastated. But such was the strong character of Betty, she soon negotiated with the Starkey family, and the Cromptons were allowed to stay to look after the property, rear their livestock, and continue with their spinning and weaving. The results of the latter they take down to the Bolton Market, at the junction of Churchgate and Bradshawgate, where the market cross still stands today. And merchants from miles around would come and buy the yarns and woven fabrics the locals had made. Samuel Cromton was fascinated with machinery, and with the help of his uncle Alexander soon learned all there was to know about spinning and weaving. And so Sam's formative years were spent each day at the spinning wheel and weaving loom, then in the evening at school, and in his spare time, sometimes late into the night, dreaming up inventions. When Sam was 14 years old, the greatest event of his young life occurred. James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny. The jenny was a major breakthrough for spinning. In comparison to the old spinning wheel, the jenny meant that multiple lengths of yarn could be spun at the same time. But it had serious limitations. The weft yarns were fairly satisfactory, but the warp yarns, particularly when the demand for lighter and old cotton cloth came along, were almost impossible. And as good a spinner as Samuel Cromton was, he often found that only 1 in 10 yarns were good enough. As he said at the time, if one good, why not all good? So spurred on by the news of Arkwright's water frame, another spinning invention of the time, Samuel Cromton set his inventive dreams to work to solve the problem that Hargreaves and Arkwright had still failed to answer. It took 5 years of hard labour, of every spare minute of day and night. Local people would see lights moving about the upper windows of Hawley Wood, and rumours of ghosts and wizards abounded, until in 1779 he had completed his first machine. Samuel Cromton had achieved what the great leaders of industry with their power and money had failed to do. He had built a spinning machine that would spin any number of lengths of even the finest yarns to perfection. And when you consider that Samuel Cromton was only 26 years old, it was a remarkable feat. Surely he was indeed a genius. To find out more about Samuel Cromton, I've come down to Hawley Wood, and I'm talking to Harold Farrell, who's the custodian of the Hawley Wood Museum. Harold, what would life have been like for the Crompton family living here all those years ago?
Well, I imagined it would be a very hard life, Roger. They came down to Hawley Wood as tenant farmers, and as many of the farmers in those days, they used to supplement the farming income by doing weaving and spinning of cotton, just like many people today have sidelines. Then weaving and spinning was their sideline. And Sam, as he helped with the spinning, he got to thinking that there must be a better way than just spinning one thread, which he worked on the Saxony spinning wheel. And he got around to thinking that there must be a better way.
He must have been working under very difficult and trying circumstances, building an invention, particularly late at night.
Yes, certainly, because they of course didn't have the electric light or gas light at that time. They would be reliant on candle light or rush lights, and so, as you say, it would be under very difficult circumstances that he built the mule, and he would only have basic hand tools as well. He was a brilliant man in that he also could play an instrument. He played the violin. He made his own violin as well, and he used to play in the Bolton Orchestra, of which he would have to either walk or go on horseback to the Bolton Theatre, and he played there, and the money that he made from playing in the theatre enabled him to purchase tools and various other things he would need to build the mule.
He had a problem after completing his work, didn't he?
Shortly after the invention of the mule, Roger, there was rather turbulent times at Hawley Wood, because the machine breakers was in the area, and it had come to the knowledge of Sam, and so he thought, well, all my hard work's not going to be destroyed by these people. I'm going to dismantle the mule and hide it in the attic, in the roof space. And even to this day, you can still see the box area in the roof space where Sam actually hid the mule. He dismantled the machine and hoisted the mule up in a crate up through the ceiling of his workshop into the roof space. And it is hoped that when at the completion of the work that's being carried out at Holliswood, that the general public will be able to go into the attic and view this spot where Sam hid the mule.
He finally left Holliswood, didn't he, around the time he got married?
Yes, he got married while he was at Holliswood, after he'd invented the mule, and he lived in cottages that adjoined the hall at that time, and he went to live in one of these cottages with his new wife, Mary Pimlott. And then shortly after that, they moved over to a farm called Oldham's, which is in the area where the Oldham's estate is now, off Belmont Road. And he lived there for quite some time.
When did Holliswood actually become a museum? Is that a recent thing?
Lord Leverhulme came across the hall in late 1800s, 1890 odd. And he saw that the hall was in very bad state of repair, and he thought, well, a fine building, fine Tudor building like this, which at that time was just being used as a farmhouse. In fact, it was reputed that there was cattle here in the Great Hall, and so he purchased the hall with a view to restoring it, furnishing it as in 17th century furniture, and then presenting it to the Bolton Corporation, and it opened as Bolton's first folk museum in 1902. Samuel Crompton's biographer, Gilbert French, made a very fine comment really about Holliswood. He mentioned that one hammer ringing out at Holliswood set thousands of hammers ringing out throughout the land.
Samuel Crompton's spinning mule was producing what many manufacturers regarded as the best yarns in the country. And this presented problems for Sam. People were naturally inquisitive. They spied on him, peeping through windows, making holes in the roof to find out how he was achieving this amazing feat. Sam shielded his invention from the outside world, but the situation was getting impossible. As he wrote at the time, "A few months reduced me to the cruel necessity either of destroying my machine altogether or giving it up to the public. To destroy it I could not think of. To give up that for which I had laboured so long was cruel. I had no patent, nor the means of purchasing one. In preference to destroying, I gave it to the public." Had Samuel Crompton been a man of high social standing and wealth, he could have organised a patent for his invention. As it was, he was at the mercy of the business community. However, an agreement was signed by many prominent businessmen to make payments to Sam for the use of his invention. But this proved not to be worth the paper it was written on. As soon as they had learned his secrets, they simply refused to pay, dismissing his claims in the most callous manner. He was visited by Sir Robert Peel, and he offered Sam a job in one of his spinning concerns in exchange for information about his invention. The two men quarrelled, for Sam was a proud man. Other wealthy manufacturers used to entice young men in Sam's employ with money to leave with the knowledge and training he'd given them. There followed an explosion of industry. Samuel Crompton's spinning mule completely revolutionised textile manufacture. Up to then, the old spinning process couldn't meet the demands of the weaving loom. Now the mule could provide mass production of high-quality yarn. As a result, the industry expanded as never before imagined. Samuel Crompton was naturally an embittered man. Although he was now a celebrity, he had very little to show for it. He saw great mills and factories being built around him. One such place was the Quarrybank Mill at Stile, which today is a working museum. where you can see spinning and weaving as it was done in years gone by.
Samuel Cromton in just a few minutes after this small commercial break. Welcome back now to the next edition of Samuel Cromton.
The Samuel Crompton story continues in 1802, when a petition was launched by a Manchester spinner called John Kennedy, who asked manufacturers to subscribe to a fund for Sam, and at the same time pursued the government, who were reputed to be receiving up to £350,000 a year in duty from the industry. The petition raised less than £500, but it did enable the Crompton family to set up spinning and weaving at King Street in the centre of Bolton. But the business was only moderately successful, even though Samuel Crompton's skill with the machinery resulted in some unique designs being woven. There was no way to stop others copying them, and his reluctance to become more of a salesman and be more businesslike didn't help either. In 1811, Samuel Crompton discovered that in England, Scotland and Ireland, over 4.5 million mule spindles were in operation, that over 700,000 people were directly or indirectly dependent on their livelihood on the yarns produced by spinning mules, and that 4/5 of the cotton goods bleached in Lancashire were woven from mule-spun yarns. So with the help of a local solicitor, he started a petition, which was signed by many leading manufacturers and machine makers. And with the assistance of members of Parliament, he succeeded in placing his petition before Spencer Percival, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. A committee was appointed and reported to the House in Crompton's favour, but the Bolton man's luck took another cruel turn. On his way to the Commons to propose a £20,000 award for Sam, Spencer Percival was shot and killed by an assassin. It was a tragedy and a political crisis, but eventually the government felt obliged to make some gesture and agreed to award Samuel Cromton £5,000, a fraction of what was to be proposed. Sam used the money to take over the Whitehall Bleach Works in Darwin, but as a brilliant inventor, he once again proved a poor businessman, and the enterprise failed. Sam and his sons were also in business with a Richard Wilde, and for a time ran a factory at Delft near Longworth, just outside Bolton. But the bad luck that had followed him through his life struck again. A midnight flood broke down the weir, and factory and machinery were swept away. As the years followed, other petitions were raised, based on the fact that from 1791 to 1816, the exports of the cotton trade had risen to over £20 million a year, a colossal amount for those days. But the pleas fell on deaf ears, and the petitions were ignored. Sam returned to Bolton to live with his daughter and her family in King Street, where they continued a small business. But as time went by, he became poorer and more miserable, and on the 26th of June 1827, Samuel Crompton died, a broken man.